Hello, everyone, and welcome to Buzzworthy Live. If you're leading strategy at an association right now, you're probably asking, what do we keep? What do we cut? And how do we make decisions that actually lead to long term member value? Today, we're diving into all of that with a guest who's asked all those questions and has the data to back up the answers. Amanda Darnley is the Chief Strategy Officer at AAMFT. Her team has used research and member feedback to rethink long standing programs, pivot fast when things shift, and build strategy that holds up, not just at launch, but long after. Amanda, so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Marcus. It's great to see you.
So I thought we'd dive right in with starting with a workforce study. That workforce study that we've chatted about before, what did you learn and how did those insights shape AMFT's broader strategy?
Sure. So we did our initial workforce study back in 2022. So we were coming right off of COVID. And like every industry, COVID really, really impacted the marriage and family therapy space. But I don't think we were prepared for quite how drastic the shifts would be. We had last done like some research around the industry and our members and things about 10 years prior. So a big chunk to compare the data to, but also, not terribly long where you would expect these drastic changes. Some of the key things we noticed that were really shifting for us was we obviously had seen a lot more diversity entering into our space. So both the clients that our people were seeing, but also our members, particularly our student members, were significantly more diverse. So that was a huge shift for us in recognizing that our folks were not only personally more diverse, but also working with much larger client base, tackling a lot more clinical issues, that sort of thing. The next big shift that we really saw was a significant change in how people were entering into the field. So marriage and family therapy is a master's degree program. There isn't a natural feeder. Certainly some folks come from like psychology programs or things like that, but also it had historically kind of been a second career position. So you had a lot of folks that were entering into other fields, then going back to graduate school later in their lives or in their career journeys, and then becoming a marriage and family therapist. And all of a sudden that had shifted, and we had more people that were entering straight out of bachelor's programs. Obviously a challenge for us if there's not a natural feeder because it just really narrows the window to try to be able to introduce them into marriage and family therapy. So that was a huge shift that was going to impact not only the industry, but also the way that the association was going to have to work moving forward. And the third big one that I think that we really, really saw was this complete shift and introduction of telehealth. We used to joke that pre-COVID, we had about 4% of our members that were doing telehealth on, majority or in all basis. And post-COVID, we only had 4% of our folks that said they were going to go entirely back to practicing in person. So it really drastically changed the introduction of technology, the way that therapy was being done, and created this really high pressure situation where we had to work with the folks in the industry to rapidly try to ramp up what we were offering and what we were supporting members with to be able to make sure that this drastic shift was going to serve the industry and serve our members as they went along.
Of course, conducting a survey like this or a study is only half the battles. Can you walk us through a little bit about really what the conclusions were and what it was like to work with your broader team in terms of making up are the next actions that should take place?
Sure. So, I think for the projects like telehealth, where we had to ramp up, we didn't really have an option. We had to ramp up as fast as we could because that was simply the way that the world was going and where the demand was. We were fortunate. We've always been an association that put an emphasis on trying to understand or introduce what was possibly coming down the path to our members. We used to joke that pre-COVID, we'd have conference sessions that were around telehealth, and you would see, a couple of people that were in there that were really interested, and then folks were like standing in the back of the room because they didn't necessarily think telehealth was for them, but it was sort of like they were at the zoo and they wanted to see the show and sort of what was going on. So we were fortunate that we had already identified some folks that were practicing telehealth that had started to look into, what was the research behind it? How could models be adapted to be more effective, like in that space? But we all of a sudden had an issue where we had to ramp that up to reach essentially MFTs across the globe. The profession isn't terribly large. We are probably the largest association that is serving, a much larger community. So we had to figure out how to take these people that we had already been working with, these guidelines that we had started to develop as sort of this best practice methodology, and ramp that up and roll that out to the 100,000, 150,000 plus MFTs across the globe. So we introduced a lot of online training. We started a program called our at-home program, since everyone was working from home, where we brought in like leading therapists from across the globe to talk to folks and sort of, serve as this touch point for like, here's some ideas on how to do this. Here's some realities that you're probably facing as you're experiencing this, or, as you're working through this. And so we really tried to take what we had started to do and ramp that up quickly so that we could, give that access to people, across sort of the space. The other thing that we, really try to do when we look at this data is to understand, well, okay, this is how it's impacting this program here, but what are the trends that we're seeing that are going to create pressure points 3 years, 5 years down the road? How can we prepare for that now as an association to ensure that if that comes faster or if that comes slower, that we're able to sort of make those adjustments and really serve this industry that we represent?
I think a lot of folks will find it relatable that one of the toughest things for an association to do is knowing when to let go of something, a favorite program, something that maybe someone on the board is particularly attached to. Traditionally, that can be something like a publication, for instance. But in your case, how do you decide when a long-standing program needs to evolve or even end?
Yeah, I think that the key to that is really understanding what the goal of the program is and how it's supposed to be serving the association or sort of the landscape of what's happening. And one of the things that we do is we do sort of we have annual goals for programs where we work with the staff that are working on them to understand, okay, this is what success looks like to us. And it's not always like a dollar figure. It's not always a registration figure. It's tied to what are we trying to accomplish with this program? Is it revenue? Is it engagement? Is it a pipeline? Is this program intended to, funnel folks into other programs that we have? So it really serves as a foundation for those. Are we trying to grow market share? Are we not really seeing any internal targets with this? Is it really about external targets? And how will we define success moving forward? And I think base setting with that information helps to get everyone on the same page so that you can recognize success. Because I've often, in the past worked with companies or programs where, people weren't on the same page. And so you get to the point where you're having to evaluate the success of the program. And some people feel really good about what it's doing and others feel, like it's really falling short. And so I think setting that early on really helps to sort of know when you need to pivot or when you need to make adjustments. The other thing that I think is really, really key is having access to data, being
Mm.
able to see, how are we moving along these trends? Let's not just wait until the end of the year to say, hey, this is where this is. And now, we have to end it. We have to pivot it. We have to do this. Let's kind of track as we're going along. And let's understand what strategies are tied to changes that we're seeing in the data. So if we are introducing a new strategy, let's time it out so that it's not buffered up against another one, so that we can kind of say, okay, we think this is making an impact for this versus this one that maybe isn't as impactful.
Mm.
So, we really emphasize trying to figure out what that data will look like and then trying to model what's happening with it as we go through. I think building those expectations, both among like staff, but also the board and members, gets everyone else on the same page of understanding, okay, this is something that, nothing is a sacred cow. Everything is designed to move the industry forward. And so sometimes that means letting go of something so that you can redirect the resources to something new that may be more impactful or may ultimately be something that is more necessary to offer as an association.
I think we probably have a lot of people in the audience that could identify with the sacred cow comment. You talked about how AMFT had to move quickly during the shift to telehealth, developing resources and stepping into advocacy and adjusting fast. Can you walk us through how your team handled that pivot and what it taught you about staying nimble?
Sure. So, like I said, I mean, certainly, I think telehealth pre-COVID for us, workforce study, was just something that maybe we saw on like the long-term horizon. We did have some online programs, but there were still people that were very, very skeptical that relational therapy could be done online effectively. I think the hard part is you have this long-standing group of experts and scholars and members that say you have to read nonverbal cues. You have to have everybody in the room to be able to see dynamics and things. And those are pretty entrenched beliefs that could be hard to shift. A lot of the folks that were most interested in telehealth may have been a little younger. They may have had more exposure to, digital communication and that sort of thing. And so it is sort of, a different sort of I don't want to say fringe group, but it was certainly people that were considered a little more progressive. And then obviously during 2020, 2021, there was this huge shift right before our workforce study to people having to practice telehealth. So initially we did a lot of what I talked about earlier. We focused on, how can we get folks on best practices? How can we, make sure that people understand compliance with, privacy laws and things like that and ensure they're just doing it correctly. Once we had some time to breathe, which, I think everybody was holding their breath a little bit. Once we had some time to breathe, the association had long known that there was some real opportunities for growth and expanding the profession through technology. We were in a developmental life cycle where our folks were moving into specialization. They wanted to be able to focus on working with certain clinical issues, certain populations, working with certain areas of the lifespan. But you're really limited when you're doing that if your expectation is that folks are driving to your office. You may really want to focus on like those that are in postpartum, for example, but you're limited based around that. So you end up becoming more of a generalist simply to get the work done and to stay viable in your career. Telehealth was going to give us that opportunity to help kind of advance the profession into our folks becoming specialists because it opened doors for them to be able to access folks that needed these services in areas that were much more broad and to be able to become sort of these subject matter experts. So we had to figure out how we were going to get telehealth to stick. And part of that is that selling people on the fact that it's effective. So one of the first things we did was pull together all the research that was being done around telehealth and feature that in a special edition of our journal. So that folks could see, what the actual data was behind it and have an understanding of what were the most effective sort of models that were being done and how could we implement that. So we were reassuring them that this could work and this would work as they were also doing it. So, I joke that it's the seismic shift, but I can't emphasize that enough. It probably moved the industry forward. What would have taken maybe a decade, maybe longer, really kind of instantaneously. So we really kind of modeled out how that shift should go and then how we could evolve it from that. We held one of our first virtual conferences. We had people attending from, I joke, every single continent except for Antarctica, because I don't think that any penguins were currently doing family therapy. If they were, we would have gotten them there. But we made sure to make it a free conference to make sure that people could attend so that we could give them an opportunity to talk about this shift with other people that they maybe weren't able to access. So that was really, really important for us as we were making this pivot and we were sort of, having to lead the way because the profession is so small when you sort of leave the US or leave North America. We were really fortunate that I think people trusted us enough to participate and to walk the walk. I think in some ways, the silver lining maybe of COVID is that folks that weren't sold on it or didn't think that they could do it suddenly, had to try it. And it really stuck. And so I think it's changed the way that the therapy industry works. It's changed the way that we work as an association. So being able to lean into that and having done our homework, but also, willing to say, okay, there are things that we have to cut and we have to make this the instantaneous priority, really positioned us as sort of a thought leader and a resource that people could come back to. So I think we were fortunate that we had leadership that recognized that early and made that our priority.
Engagement can mean a million things, but with AAMT, how do you define engagement in a way that actually connects to retention and long-term member value?
Yeah, this is a tough one, because I think that engagement looks different for every association, but I'd also argue it looks different for every program. So
Mhm.
I do kind of go back to, one of those basics about associations, which is, that pyramid of membership and understanding that, you have different levels in that pyramid. And if you kind of think of like, that top level is people that serve on your board or they're your key volunteers, they're the ones that are the most engaged in what you're doing as an association, but also giving you the most kind of feedback about what's happening in the industry. For us, a lot of times that tends to be folks that maybe or at least are partially working in academia. They have more availability to be able to volunteer, or it's looked at much more kind of favorably for their employment because part of their job is, engaging with potential therapists, building these research and these bodies of work. What's left out sometimes is the voice of those people that are at the base of the pyramid that are actually the majority of your membership. And for us, a lot of times those are therapists that are working in individual private practice. They are small business owners. They don't have as much time to give us this feedback or to really, highly engage in what we're doing. So when I talk about engagement with different programs, I try to make sure that we're creating programs that have different levels of engagement, things that appeal to sort of that more private practitioner that has less available time. Well, for them, engagement might be watching a 1 minute video, or it may be, signing up for an online continuing education course because they need to do the continuing education, but it's also a huge expense for them to shut down their practice and travel to go somewhere. So engagement for that group looks a lot different, but it's vitally important because they are the majority of the folks that we're representing. And I think when you look at engagement, at the top, you understand what's the engagement experience. You want people to feel valued. You want them to feel like, if they're taking the time to share their opinions, their thoughts, their voice, their energy, their resources with you, you want to make sure that they're feeling heard back. So I think making sure that you're creating micro and macro volunteer opportunities or engagement opportunities allows you to kind of hit that broad spectrum and feel much more like you're a fit for everyone, no matter where they sort of are in that pyramid.
I think that's a really great answer. I often say that value is the precursor to engagement, where, perhaps people could get fixated on this general idea of engagement and increasing engagement. But we all have to kind of remember that, we're human beings, we're animals, and you see people engage with things that are of value to you. So for you to take a step back and look at it on that level, I think is just incredibly important to actually move the needle in terms of engagement.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to recognize that sometimes membership is sort of a pipeline.
Mm.
There you can dabble in an experience with an association, or you join an association, when you're in college or you're in graduate school because you think it's a field you want to go into. And oftentimes, membership in an association is much less expensive when you're at that level. So it's easier to say, I can dip my toe in and get an idea of sort of, what's going on. And maybe it leads to me making a connection to find a job when I'm out of school, or it leads to me finding a mentor or, something like that. But when you are further in your career and it's more expensive to engage with an association, you have to have, like you said, that value add in your head. You have to feel like this is worth what I am investing in and I'm getting it back. And so I think, looking at the whole life cycle of one of your members' careers and understanding like where are their pinch points, where are the places where you're seeing membership fall off, and could that be a possible reason? Are you, overlooking a gap where, the resources that you offer or the place that they're at doesn't align with the way that you have your sort of membership journey mapped out? And does that create an opportunity there to be able to target a program at that or repurpose content in a way that meets those members where they are in their current kind of space?
We know programs can't just serve one purpose anymore. How do you think about designing content or initiatives that hit multiple goals or speak to different audiences without losing clarity?
Sure. Actually, this is a great opportunity. I'd love to kind of talk about the Jobs of Tomorrow program that we did with Tailwind,
Mm.
because I think it is a good example of how we sort of approach these targets. So the workforce study had told us that we had this new entry point for people that were entering the profession. And it was this much smaller window where we had to sort of introduce marriage and family therapy to them before we're asking them to make a pretty big investment in master's programs, in training, in this path towards licensure. It's not a path that is for the weak. It's definitely a tough road to become an MFT. And so one of the things that we did is, when we had this opportunity to participate in developing Jobs of Tomorrow marriage and family therapy, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to obviously develop content that gave a good snapshot of how broad this field can be, and how people use these skills beyond just working, in what you think of in a traditional therapy setting, and what that could look like. And I think you will do a great job with the program of saying, hey, we're going to create these different levels of content for you. So we have like social media content that maybe is just a snippet that somebody gets, where they're like, oh, I didn't know like that's what a marriage and family therapist did. Then we have these shorter, educational micro lessons that are about 6 minutes, where somebody can jump in. It's something you might, watch while you're kind of waiting for a commercial break, or you're, just kind of randomly scrolling and get sucked into. But it's not this huge time commitment where all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, like I don't have time to watch this. This looks like it's going to be a lot. But we do offer those full episodes that are those, 25-minute deep dives into various aspects of the profession. And so what we did when we created our rollout strategy for that was to say, okay, look, the main audience that we're trying to hit with this is potential future MFTs. Those are
Mhm.
people that are going to be that, much shorter kind of window. So we're going to target our strategy there with that shorter content. We're going to look for them in TikTok and digital advertising, in places that we're finding sort of these new audiences. But we also want this to serve our members. And for our members, it's giving them the tools to say, okay, this is a tool that you can use to present marriage and family therapy to potential clients, to explain the difference in, the work that you're doing versus other types of therapists, without you having to explain it. It's somebody else's perspective. And the client may see themselves in what's being represented, and, feel more passionately about that and come to you as a client. These people that are in this student program, where they've just invested a lot of resources and time and energy into saying, I want to be a marriage and family therapist, but they're in a training program with a certain number of MFTs. So professors can use the content to say, here are all the different types of jobs that you can do with your career. Here are perspectives from 18 different therapists that all vary in different parts of their careers, in different focuses, in different workplace settings. And so you may be able to see yourself in a way that you wouldn't in just a sort of traditional training program. So I think, just developing these 6 videos and then figuring out how to splice them differently or present them differently in a different context allowed us to access all of these different audiences and provide something that is going to be a resource for really kind of every segment of the industry. And so I think when you think about a program, certainly think small, but also think scalable, because if it does take off, or if you are investing a little extra resources, can you make this big jump to hit another important goal that you have as an association or as a industry? And I think being able to do that lets you target your resources in a lot better, and opens up places for opportunities, or if you have to pivot to address challenges, because you sort of have this scalable model that exists.
Matt, we covered a lot in a short amount of time, but we have a few questions from the audience. How about we take a shot at answering a couple of those?
Sure. I mean, nothing like being put on the spot. I like it.
All right, we have a great question here. This one here is from Bruce. How can we convince boards to set up programs when board members say we're a not-for-profit, so there are programs we should do even if the data show it isn't successful? This is a good one.
Yeah, it is. I used to have, our old CEO used to have at the bottom of his email signature, that not-for-profit doesn't mean that you're not a business. And I think that that's where you really start with boards, is understanding that, if you are solely focused on the mission, and I think this comes up a lot more with less with membership associations and trade associations, and a lot more with more traditional kind of nonprofits that deal with specific disease or health related issues and things like that, where people become really tied into the mission and believe the service is the main aspect. And we always talk about, we always sort of reemphasize that associations and nonprofits' role is to be able to advance industries, advance causes, advance the work that's being done, or essentially by these other people or these other groups. But that can only be done if the lights are on. That can only be done if there's someone to answer the phones. That can only be done if there's someone to provide services related to the programs, or to do the advocacy work and make sure that people understand what it is that is trying to be advanced. And so I think that orienting your board to the importance of that is a big thing. The other thing that we really, really try to do is, like I said, create those metrics early on for what does success look like. And we use those with our board to educate them around how programs look. Our CFO does a great job of sort of creating, even with financials that can sometimes be complicated for boards to understand, to sort of create the system of like, this is a red light, this is a green light, this is a yellow light when they go through training, to understand, for us, this is why we would consider this a success, or why we would say that this isn't a success. So I think that goes a long way to sort of letting go of some of those secret cows. But I also think sometimes it's just a process. When we were moving towards introducing like a virtual conference, that was hard. Like I said, even with the telehealth example, our folks are very much rooted in the idea of like interpersonal connection and relationships and seeing face to face. So really like coming back and having this conversation over and over again with the numbers of like, yes, but are enough of our people able to access those resources? Are enough of our people able to access that program? Being beloved by a certain percentage of the membership doesn't mean that the program is serving the industry or serving the entire membership. And so I think being able to use those measures of success and coming back to say, okay, but this is designed to reach a lot more people, or we should be expecting more as an outcome from this program, helps to reframe the conversation, so you don't have that confusion of like, well, I think this is doing great, and person B thinks that this is really not meeting the mark.
I think that's absolutely great advice. I think we also have time for one more question here. This one was sent in anonymously. Do you have any advice for making sure we act on research instead of just sitting in a report?
That is tough. We just did a follow-up study to our 2022 study, and we got back from the researchers, I'm not exaggerating, 175 different trends. Which thrills somebody like me that wants to deep dive into that data. But I know if I give that to our staff, that it will never be read and it will never be accessed. Even if someone reads it, they're not going to make all those connections, because that's a lot to ask someone to do, especially if they're not, they're working in a role where they maybe don't have the kind of broad spectrum of looking at what's going on across the entire association. So I highly recommend like boiling things down to, these are the top 5 trends that we're seeing coming out of this, or these are the top 5 data points that we really see impacting your department over the next year. One of the things that kind of came out for us in this last round of research was some of the assumptions and the things that were true in 2022 out of the data were not necessarily still true, or they had shifted some. And I think that it is a reflection of, society shifting, the economy shifting, those kinds of things. But you can't be solely reliant on these data conclusions anymore without doing follow-up work to make sure that you understand the whys and the hows, and, how that can impact how you want to implement things. So I'm a big proponent of, circulative data, coming back to look at trends and seeing if they're holding true. And then I think it's having the conversations around the data and boiling it down, having somebody that like owns it and then can parse it out and say, hey, these are the things that really seem to be impacting the work that you're working on. So let's talk about that and see if you have an understanding of that, if it reflects sort of what you're seeing. And if not, how can we make those alignments to better understand, what that looks like moving forward.
I think that's very helpful advice for the folks watching. Amanda, just like that, a half an hour went by. Thanks for so much for sharing your experience with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And before we wrap up, can you share how people can connect with you and follow your work at AMFT?
Sure. So I'm always on LinkedIn, Amanda Darnley, easy to search, nothing hidden there. And that's probably the best place. That's where I share a lot of what we've got going on. We have a bunch of new programs we're getting ready to launch for our folks. So I'll definitely be busy on that space. And I love connecting and kind of seeing what other folks are doing there.
Fantastic. Well, I highly recommend everyone gives Amanda a connection request because she's doing great work over at AAMFT, and it's always such a wonderful opportunity to speak with her. But I want to thank everyone at home. Thank you so much for watching and being with us here today. If you missed last month's season for the Tailwind panel, the last session rather, for the Tailwind panel following ASAE's annual conference, you can check that out at our content hub located on our website at tailwinddigital.com. And until next time, we'll see you on Buzzworthy Live.